Hi everybody. This should be one of our quickest trigonometry videos. I just want to talk very quickly about the domain, range, and period of sine and cosine. Let's remind ourselves about domain and range. Domain is all the possible x values. Range is all the possible y values for a function. And what we're talking about here is what comes into the sine function and what comes out, and what goes into the cosine function and comes out. Now, remember that when we talked about the unit circle, our x-coordinate corresponded to cosine, and our y-coordinate corresponded to sine. What I've done is I have written the cosine values in blue, and I've written the sine values in red. Now you'll notice I haven't used their radical equivalents, the exact equivalents. I've actually gone ahead and put them in decimal form so they're easier to see in terms of domain and range. This is not the way you need to be remembering sine and cosine. These are decimal equivalents. Obviously 1/2 is 0.5. Radical 2 over 2 I have rounded to 0.707. Again, that's rounded. Radical 2 over 2 is a much better way of writing it. And radical 3 over 2 when rounded is about 0.866. So that's where I've gotten these numbers from. Okay, so these are the actual unit circle coordinates written in decimal form. So let's talk about domain first of all. And what we should be asking ourselves is there any value of x? Are there any values of x? Are there any angles for which sine or cosine cannot be calculated? Are there any x values that are not allowed? And the answer is no. You can put any angle whatsoever into sine and any angle whatsoever into cosine, and you will get an answer. So your domain for both of them, and it's going to be the same for both, your domain for both sine and cosine is all real numbers. Now let's look at the range. The range is what values of sine and cosine can we have? Let's take a look at the blue numbers first. That's cosine. Notice we start with 1, we go down, 0.866, 0.707, 0.5 to 0. Then I go down even farther, negative 0.5, negative 0.707, negative 0.866 to negative 1. So going through the first two quadrants, I've gone from 1 down to 0 down to negative 1, and then what happens? Then we go back up again. We go from negative 1 up to 0, up to 1 again. So cosine cycles between 1, goes from 1 down to negative 1, and then it turns around and it comes back up to 1 again. So my range for cosine are going to be numbers between negative 1 and 1 inclusive. In other words, they include negative 1 and 1. That's why we use the square bracket in interval notation. Okay? I hope you can see that the red does exactly the same. Okay? We go from 0 up to 1, down to 0, down to negative 1, up to 0 again. Same cycle, slightly different numbers, but it's still cycling between positive 1 and negative 1. So, for both sine and cosine, the range is from negative 1 to 1 inclusive on both endpoints, meaning that your sine of any angle cannot be bigger than 1 and cannot be less than 1. All sines and cosines must be in between, but can include negative 1 and 1. No sines or cosines bigger than 1, no sines or cosines less than negative 1. My last bit of business then is the period. If you've had physics, you probably recognize that term, but a period means how long does it take before the cycle repeats itself. And I think you can probably see that from what I just did. Again, let me do the cosine again. I'll do it in blue this time. 1, 0, -1, 0, 1. And then what happens? It starts over again. 0, -1, 0, 1. 0, -1, 0, 1. How often does it repeat? Every full revolution, which we know is 2 pi, right? And I think you'll see that sine is the same. 0 to 1 to 0 to -1 to 0, and the cycle starts over again. So 2 pi is our period. So here's the important information right here. For sine and cosine, the bottom line, the conclusion, for sine and cosine, your domain is all real numbers. You can put any value into the sine and cosine function, but you will only get out numbers range between -1 and 1, including both endpoints, and its cycles, its period is every 2 pi the cycle repeats. That's what you need to know about the domain, range, and period of sine and cosine. Thanks.